You wake up earlier than most people. You work while everyone else is sleeping. You read books, listen to podcasts, take notes, build skills, chase certifications, stay late, skip vacations. Every year you become a little smarter, a little more capable, a little more experienced, and yet, somehow, life doesn't seem to move at the same speed as your effort. You watch someone with fewer qualifications land the promotion you wanted. A former coworker suddenly launches a company and seems to know exactly the right investors. An old classmate appears on your screen celebrating another milestone, another opportunity, another door opening. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it feels confusing. Because you've been doing everything people told you to do. Work hard, stay focused, keep improving. Eventually someone will notice. So you keep waiting. And while you're waiting, years quietly pass. Here's the strange part. Most ambitious people don't think they're lonely. They think they're independent. They tell themselves they don't need help. That asking questions makes them look inexperienced. That reaching out after months or years would feel awkward. That everyone else is too busy anyway. Little by little, independence becomes a habit. And habits become identities. Without realizing it, you stop building a life with people and start trying to build it alone. It doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in tiny decisions. I'll send that message tomorrow. I'll call when I have more time. I should reconnect eventually. I don't want to bother them. Tomorrow becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. Then one day you need advice, or an introduction, or simply someone who believes in you. And that's when you discover something uncomfortable. Relationships don't appear the moment you need them. They grow long before you do. Our culture rarely teaches this. From childhood, we're told stories about the lone genius, the entrepreneur who built everything from a garage, the visionary who changed the world through sheer determination, the athlete who succeeded because they wanted it more than everyone else. We admire the person standing on the stage. We almost never see the thousands of conversations, mentors, teachers, colleagues, friends, introductions, and quiet supporters standing just outside the spotlight. Success often looks individual. But behind almost every extraordinary achievement is an invisible network of ordinary human relationships. Think about your own life for a moment, not your resume, not your job title, just your life. Who gave you your first opportunity? Who recommended your name when you weren't in the room? Who encouraged you when you doubted yourself? Who answered a question that changed your direction? Who introduced you to someone that opened another door? If you're honest, very few meaningful moments happen completely alone. Most of them arrive through another person. And yet, when we're busy chasing the next goal, relationships become the first thing we postpone. We convince ourselves we'll reconnect after the project ends, after the promotion, after the business grows, after life becomes less busy. But life rarely becomes less busy. It simply gives us new reasons to delay what matters. There's another prison ambitious people rarely notice. It's the belief that value is something you prove before you deserve connection. You think, when I'm more successful, then I'll reach out. When I finally achieve something, then people will take me seriously. When I have something impressive to share, then I'll reconnect. But what if you've reversed the order? What if connection isn't the reward for success? What if it's one of the reasons success becomes possible? That question is uncomfortable because it challenges something many of us quietly believe. That our future depends mostly on our individual effort. Effort matters, discipline matters, learning matters. But imagine trying to light a fire with only one piece of wood. No matter how dry it is, no matter how carefully you protect it, without something else to ignite it, the flame struggles to grow. People are remarkably similar. Potential often needs other people before it becomes visible. This isn't about popularity. It isn't about collecting business cards. It isn't about becoming the loudest person in every room. It's about recognizing a truth that many high achievers discover much later than they wish they had. Your career doesn't exist in isolation. Your ideas don't exist in isolation. Your opportunities don't exist in isolation. Neither do you. And maybe the greatest cost of trying to succeed alone isn't the opportunities you lose. Maybe it's the person you slowly become. Someone who believes asking for help is weakness. Someone who measures every day by productivity but forgets to measure connection. Someone surrounded by people, yet increasingly unknown. That's the invisible prison. It doesn't have walls, it doesn't have locks, it feels responsible, it feels efficient. Sometimes it even feels noble. But over time, it quietly separates us from one of the most powerful forces in human progress, other people. So before we talk about strategies, before we talk about networking, before we talk about careers or opportunities, we have to ask a much deeper question. Why have so many ambitious people accepted a version of success that slowly disconnects them from everyone else? Because once you understand the answer, you'll never look at relationships the same way again. The answer isn't that ambitious people stop caring about others. Far from it. Most genuinely want stronger friendships, better mentors, a richer professional life, more meaningful conversations. The problem isn't desire, it's direction. Somewhere along the way, many of us accepted a definition of success that quietly rewrote our priorities. We began measuring our lives by what we could produce, instead of what we could contribute. Every morning starts with a checklist, emails, meetings, deadlines, projects, goals. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. The problem is what never makes the list. Call your old mentor. Check on the colleague who changed jobs. Congratulate someone who accomplished something meaningful. Introduce two people who could help each other. Ask someone how they're really doing without needing anything in return. Those moments rarely feel urgent, so they quietly disappear beneath everything that does. And that's how the invisible prison becomes stronger. Not through dramatic mistakes, but through small acts of neglect repeated over years. Imagine planting a tree. You don't water it for 6 months. You don't check the soil. You don't protect it from storms. Then one day you desperately need its shade. No one would expect that tree to suddenly grow overnight. Yet that's exactly how many of us treat our relationships. We assume they'll always be there, waiting, unchanged, ready whenever we decide to return. Human relationships don't work that way. Like gardens, they respond to attention. Like muscles, they weaken when ignored. Like trust, they grow almost invisibly, until one day their strength becomes impossible to miss. There's another belief hiding beneath all of this. One that sounds responsible, even admirable. I don't want to bother people. At first it feels polite, but listen closely. Sometimes that's consideration. Other times, it's fear wearing the mask of courtesy. Fear of rejection. Fear of awkwardness. Fear of discovering that the connection isn't as strong as we hoped. So instead of risking a brief moment of discomfort, we accept years of distance. Think about someone who once mattered in your life. Maybe a former coworker, a professor, a childhood friend. Someone who believed in you before you believed in yourself. How many times have they crossed your mind only for you to think, I should reach out someday? That word, someday, has quietly stolen more relationships than conflict ever has. Because someday doesn't exist on a calendar, only today does. It's interesting how differently we treat our careers. If an important project needed attention, we'd schedule it. If a skill needed improvement, we'd practice it. If an investment needed protecting, we'd monitor it. But when it comes to people, we often rely on memory, on good intentions, on hope. And hope is a poor scheduling system. The modern world doesn't make this any easier. Technology promised to keep us connected. In many ways it has. We can send a message across the world in seconds. We can see photographs from someone we've never met. We know what hundreds of people had for breakfast. Yet despite all of this, many people have never felt more disconnected, because information is not intimacy. Following someone's life isn't the same as participating in it. A heart on a social media post isn't the same as a conversation, and collecting contacts isn't the same as earning trust. There's a difference between being visible and being remembered, between being known and being valued. That difference is built slowly, one genuine conversation at a time, one act of generosity at a time, one moment of showing up when there's nothing to gain. History reminds us of this again and again. The greatest discoveries weren't created inside isolated minds forever sealed off from the world. Scientists challenged one another. Artists inspired one another. Entrepreneurs found partners. Writers exchanged ideas. Movements grew because people gathered around a shared purpose. Progress has almost always been collaborative. The myth of the completely self-made individual is compelling because it feels simple. One person, one dream, one victory. Reality is far more beautiful. Every remarkable life is filled with invisible fingerprints. Teachers, friends, critics, family members, mentors, colleagues, strangers who offered one conversation at exactly the right moment. None of that diminishes achievement, it explains it. And perhaps that's the most freeing realization of all. You don't have to carry everything alone. You were never supposed to. Maybe strength isn't measured by how little you need other people. Maybe it's measured by how deeply you're willing to invest in them. But if that's true, then an uncomfortable question begins to emerge. If relationships are so important, why do some people naturally create them while others spend years feeling disconnected? Is it personality, confidence, charisma, or is there another way of thinking that most of us were simply never taught? That question changes everything, because once you stop seeing relationships as accidents and start seeing them as something that can be intentionally cultivated, success begins to look very different. Not easier, not faster, but far less lonely. And that's where our story truly begins. Because one person spent decades studying this hidden pattern, not by asking how to meet more people, but by asking a far more powerful question. What if the most valuable opportunities in life don't begin with ambition? What if they begin with generosity? Maybe the hardest part about living inside an invisible prison is that you don't realize you're paying for it until years later. Because isolation rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with an argument. or a dramatic goodbye. It happens quietly. One unanswered message, one postponed phone call, one lunch that never gets scheduled, one friendship you assume will always be there. Then life gets busy, careers accelerate, families grow, cities change, people move on, and somehow, without either of you ever making the decision, the relationship simply disappears. Think about the last 10 years of your life. Not the projects you finished, not the money you earned. Think about the people. Who used to know everything about your life, but now knows almost nothing? Who once believed in you before anyone else did, but hasn't heard your voice in years? Who crossed your mind dozens of times, yet never received the message you intended to send? It's uncomfortable to admit, but many of us don't lose relationships because of conflict. We lose them because of neglect. Neglect is strange. It never feels dangerous in the moment. Skipping one conversation doesn't seem important. Neither does delaying one reply, or canceling one dinner. But relationships don't disappear because of one decision. They disappear because of hundreds of tiny decisions that all sound reasonable. I'm exhausted, I'll do it next week. They're probably busy, I don't want to interrupt. Eventually, those tiny decisions become distance, and distance slowly becomes silence. Imagine a young consultant, let's call him Daniel. Daniel isn't extraordinary, he's simply ambitious. He arrives before everyone else, leaves after everyone else, reads on weekends, answers emails at midnight. His performance reviews are excellent, everyone agrees he's talented. Daniel tells himself one story over and over. If I keep producing great work, everything else will take care of itself. So every invitation becomes optional. Every coffee becomes another hour of work. Every conversation becomes something he'll make time for later. 5 years pass. Then one morning, the promotion everyone expected Daniel to receive goes to someone else. Someone less experienced. Someone with fewer technical skills. Someone Daniel quietly believes he outperformed. He's frustrated, confused, maybe even angry. He tells himself the system is unfair. But what he never sees is the meeting that happened months before. The conversation where another manager said, I've worked with her during 3 difficult projects. I trust her. I know how she handles pressure. People genuinely enjoy working with her. Those words weren't built in a single meeting. They were built over hundreds of small interactions, conversations, shared lunches, moments of support, acts of reliability. Daniel wasn't passed over because he lacked talent. He was passed over because trust had been growing somewhere he wasn't paying attention. Now imagine that same pattern repeated over an entire lifetime. The mentor you never updated, the former colleague who started a company, the neighbor who became an investor, the classmate who became a CEO, the friend who would have introduced you to the person who changed everything. You'll never know how many opportunities quietly pass beside your life. Because relationships don't send rejection letters, they simply stop creating possibilities. And perhaps that's the cruelest part. You can't miss what you never knew existed. Most people believe opportunity arrives with a knock on the door, but opportunity usually whispers. It travels through conversations you'll never hear, recommendations made while you're absent, your name mentioned in rooms you've never entered, doors opening because someone trusted you enough to open them, or remaining closed because nobody thought to mention you. That's the hidden cost, not rejection, invisibility. And the invisible prison grows stronger because it convinces you that more effort is the answer. Work harder, become more impressive, collect more achievements. Meanwhile, the real problem remains untouched. If this prison has walls, they aren't made of concrete. They're made of beliefs. The first wall says, I have to do everything myself. It sounds independent, but eventually it becomes exhausting. The second wall says, I'll reach out once I'm more successful, as if friendship must be earned, as if your value begins only after your achievements. The third wall whispers, I don't want to bother anyone. Sometimes that's kindness, but many times it's fear wearing the mask of politeness. And the fourth wall might be the strongest of all. My work should speak for itself. Hard work absolutely matters, but work cannot shake someone's hand. Work cannot ask how they're doing after a difficult week. Work cannot celebrate another person's success. People do that. For years, many of us keep reinforcing those 4 walls without realizing we're building our own prison. Then one day, something unexpected happens. You don't need another productivity system. You don't need another time management trick. You don't even need another motivational speech. You need another human being. Someone who believes in you. Someone who tells you the truth. Someone who opens a door you cannot open alone. And that's the moment the prison finally becomes visible. Not because you've become weaker, but because you've remembered something you've known since childhood. Human beings were never designed to thrive alone. The question isn't whether relationships matter. Deep down, almost everyone already knows they do. The real question is far more unsettling. If relationships are this important, why do so many intelligent, hardworking people spend decades accidentally neglecting them? To answer that, we first have to challenge one of the most celebrated stories in modern culture. the story of the self-made success. If you've ever heard someone say, "I built everything myself," listen a little more carefully, not because they're lying, but because no single human being can possibly see every hand that helped shape their life. Long before anyone builds a company, someone teaches them how to think. Long before anyone leads a team, someone gives them their first chance. Long before anyone stands on a stage, someone believes in them while nobody else does. Those moments don't usually make headlines, but they change lives. We have a habit of celebrating the final chapter while ignoring every chapter that came before it. We admire the athlete lifting the trophy, rarely the coach who refused to let them quit. We celebrate the founder ringing the opening bell at a stock exchange, rarely the first customer who took a chance, or the mentor who made one introduction that changed everything. Success has always been a shared story. We've simply become very good at editing everyone else out. Maybe that's why the idea of the self-made person is so appealing. It's clean, simple, easy to remember. One person, one dream, one victory. Reality is rarely that neat. Think about your own life again. Not the biggest achievements, the turning points, the moments that quietly changed your direction. The teacher who challenged you, the manager who trusted you, the friend who introduced you to someone new, the stranger whose advice arrived at exactly the right time. If you traced those moments backward, you'd probably discover something surprising. Many of the biggest changes in your life didn't begin with a decision. They began with a relationship, and that raises a fascinating question. If relationships shape so much of our future, why do we spend so little time learning how to build them well? Schools teach mathematics, business schools teach finance, companies teach leadership. Very few places teach something just as fundamental: how to become the kind of person people genuinely want to help. Not because they owe you, not because they're obligated, but because trust has been earned long before the opportunity appeared. For years, one entrepreneur became fascinated by exactly that question. He wasn't interested in collecting business cards. He wasn't searching for clever networking tricks. He noticed a pattern. Again and again, the people creating extraordinary opportunities seemed to approach relationships differently. They stayed in touch when they didn't need anything. They celebrated other people's success without expecting credit. They introduced people who had never met. They remembered small details everyone else forgot. From the outside, it looked effortless, almost natural. But the more he observed, the clearer something became. These weren't random personality traits. They were deliberate habits, habits that quietly transformed careers, friendships, businesses, and entire lives. That entrepreneur was Keith Ferrazzi. Over decades, through his own experiences and by studying some of the world's most connected leaders, he reached a conclusion that challenged almost everything modern ambition teaches us. The biggest opportunities in life rarely begin with a resume. They begin with a relationship, not a relationship built for advantage, a relationship built on genuine curiosity, on generosity, on showing up consistently when there's nothing immediate to gain. It's a simple idea. But simple ideas are often the most difficult to live because they ask us to measure success differently. Not by asking how many people know my name, but by asking whose life is genuinely better because I was part of it. That question changes the entire conversation. It shifts the focus away from becoming impressive and toward becoming valuable, away from collecting contacts and toward earning trust, away from chasing opportunity and toward creating the conditions where opportunity naturally grows. This isn't a lesson about being more social. It's a lesson about seeing people differently. Because once you stop viewing relationships as transactions and begin seeing them as lifelong investments in other human beings, every conversation changes. Every introduction matters. Every small act of generosity carries a weight you may not recognize until years later. And that's the idea we'll explore next. Not how to network, not how to make a better first impression, but how one completely different philosophy of human connection can quietly reshape an entire life. Because the people who always seem to be in the right room, meeting the right person, at exactly the right time, may not be the luckiest people in the world. They may simply understand something the rest of us were never taught. And that's where our journey truly begins. If you've made it this far, there's a good chance you've already begun questioning something that once felt obvious. Maybe success isn't only about effort. Maybe the hours you've worked, the skills you've built, the sacrifices you've made were never the complete equation. But if that's true, then another question naturally follows. Where did we learn the opposite? Why do so many intelligent people spend decades believing that success is something you earn almost entirely on your own? The answer isn't found in a single book or a single speech. It's woven into the stories we've been hearing since childhood. We grow up celebrating the lone hero, the student who studies alone and graduates at the top of the class, the entrepreneur working late into the night inside a garage, the inventor with one brilliant idea, the athlete whose determination carried them to victory. These stories inspire us because they highlight courage, persistence, discipline, and all of those qualities matter. But they leave something important out. They usually begin long after the real story has already started. The coach who believed first, the teacher who noticed potential, the friend who introduced the future business partner, the parent who quietly sacrificed, the colleague who offered one unexpected opportunity. The invisible moments rarely become part of the legend, yet they often make the legend possible. Think about how we describe successful people. We say they climbed the ladder, built the company, created the movement, changed the industry. The language itself suggests one person standing alone. But if you looked closely at almost any remarkable life, you'd probably discover something very different. Not a ladder, a web. Thousands of conversations, hundreds of acts of trust. People opening doors for one another, ideas passing from one mind to another, encouragement arriving at exactly the right moment. The image changes completely. Success stops looking like a straight line. It starts looking like an ecosystem. And ecosystems survive because everything inside them is connected. The same is true for human progress. History is full of partnerships that reshape the world. Scientists challenging one another's ideas. Artists inspiring artists. Engineers building on discoveries made decades earlier. Communities solving problems no individual could solve alone. When we celebrate only the visible achievement, we overlook the invisible relationships that sustained it. That's the lie. Not that hard work matters. Hard work absolutely matters. The lie is believing hard work is sufficient by itself. Imagine planting the world's healthiest seed in completely dry soil. The seed isn't the problem. The environment is. Potential works much the same way. Talent is the seed, character is the root, but relationships are the soil. Without healthy soil, even extraordinary potential struggles to grow. This is where many ambitious people become trapped. They spend years improving the seed. Sharper skills, better habits, more knowledge, more credentials, all worthwhile. But very little attention is given to the environment surrounding those strengths. Who encourages your growth? Who challenges your thinking? Who trusts your judgment? Who mentions your name when opportunities arise? Those questions rarely appear on performance reviews, yet they quietly shape careers every single day. For years, conventional wisdom encouraged people to think in terms of competition, stand out, beat everyone else, become indispensable. But there's another way to think. What if your greatest advantage isn't becoming more important than everyone around you? What if it's becoming genuinely valuable to everyone around you? Notice the difference. One mindset asks, how do I get ahead? The other asks, how do we all move forward together? At first, the second question sounds almost naive, until you begin noticing something remarkable. The people who ask it consistently seem to build lives filled with trust, opportunity, partnership, and resilience, not because the world rewards kindness automatically, but because trust changes how people make decisions. When uncertainty appears, people choose those they trust. When difficult projects emerge, people recommend those they trust. When meaningful opportunities arise, people remember those they trust. Trust isn't built during the moment of opportunity. It's built long before the opportunity exists. And that realization quietly overturns one of the biggest assumptions many of us have carried for years. Maybe success isn't something we achieve first and then share with others. Maybe success grows because we've spent years investing in other people before we ever needed anything from them. That idea is simple enough to say. Living it is something else entirely. Because it requires replacing a deeply rooted habit. Instead of asking, what can this relationship do for me? You begin asking, what can I contribute to this person's life? That single question doesn't just change conversations, it changes identity. It transforms relationships from transactions into commitments, from opportunities into responsibilities, from networking into something much more human. And once you begin looking at the world through that lens, a fascinating pattern starts to emerge. The people creating the strongest relationships aren't necessarily the most charismatic. They aren't always the most extroverted. They aren't the loudest voice in the room. They simply operate by a philosophy that most of us were never taught. A philosophy built on generosity before gain, contribution before recognition, trust before opportunity. Understanding that philosophy became the lifelong pursuit of Keith Ferrazzi, not because he believed relationships were useful, but because he came to believe they were the foundation upon which almost every meaningful opportunity is built. The question was no longer whether relationships mattered. The question became, what does it actually look like to build them with intention, authenticity, and consistency over an entire lifetime? That's where the real journey begins. Every philosophy begins somewhere. Not in a boardroom, not on a stage, usually around an ordinary dinner table. Long before Keith Ferrazzi became known for writing about relationships, before the conferences, before the companies, before the best-selling books, he was simply a young boy growing up in a small town. His family didn't possess extraordinary wealth. They didn't have influential last names. They didn't belong to exclusive circles. What they did have was something far more valuable, an understanding of people. Keith watched his father move through the world in a way that seemed almost invisible to everyone else. He didn't divide people into important and unimportant. The factory manager deserved respect. So did the mechanic, the executive, the receptionist, the waitress, the neighbor. To his father, every person had a story worth hearing, and every conversation mattered. As a child, you don't analyze moments like these. You absorb them. Without realizing it, you begin learning what normal looks like. For some children, normal is watching adults compete. For others, it's watching adults complain. Keith watched something different. He watched someone make people feel seen. If his father remembered someone's name, it wasn't because he had a networking strategy. It was because names mattered. If he asked about someone's family, it wasn't to gain an advantage. It was because he genuinely cared about the answer. Those may seem like small details, but childhood often teaches us life's biggest lessons through ordinary moments. Think back to your own childhood. There were probably adults you instantly trusted, not because they were powerful, because they made you feel important. They listened without looking at the clock. They remembered things you had forgotten mentioning. They gave you the feeling that, for a few minutes, you were the only person in the room. Years later, you may not remember exactly what they said, but you'll remember how you felt. That's the strange thing about human connection. People rarely remember every conversation. They remember the emotional imprint, how someone made them feel about themselves. Keith would carry that lesson with him long before he had words for it. As he grew older, his world became larger. New schools, new cities, new opportunities, new people. The environments changed. The principal didn't. Again and again, he noticed something curious. The people who created lasting opportunities weren't necessarily the smartest in the room. They weren't always the most charismatic. They weren't always the loudest. But they shared one remarkable quality. Wherever they went, they left relationships stronger than they found them. Some introduced strangers who later became lifelong collaborators. Some quietly helped others without asking for recognition. Some remembered birthdays. Some checked in months after a difficult conversation. Some celebrated another person's success as if it were their own. None of those actions appeared revolutionary. Individually, they looked almost insignificant, but together, they created lives surrounded by trust. And trust has a remarkable way of multiplying. One conversation becomes another. One introduction creates two more. One act of generosity inspires another. Over time, the effect becomes almost impossible to measure. Looking back, it can seem as though certain people simply attract opportunity. But perhaps what we're really seeing is years of invisible investment finally becoming visible. This realization stayed with Keith, not as a finished theory, as a question. Why do some people leave almost every interaction with a stronger relationship than when they arrived? And just as importantly, could anyone learn to do the same? Most people would have searched for better networking techniques, better conversation starters, better ways to impress people. Keith became interested in something much deeper. What kind of person naturally builds trust? Because if trust could be understood, perhaps opportunity could be understood too. That question would eventually shape his career. But before it became a philosophy, it was simply an observation repeated over and over again. The greatest connectors weren't chasing relationships. They were cultivating them, patiently, quietly, consistently, long before they ever needed anything in return. And that's where one of the biggest misconceptions about success begins to fall apart. We've been taught to believe that opportunity comes first, and relationships follow. But what if reality works in exactly the opposite direction? What if the opportunity you've been hoping for isn't waiting at the end of another certification, another late night, or another year of working in isolation? What if it's already growing inside relationships you've either been nurturing or quietly neglecting? That possibility changes everything, because it suggests that success isn't only about becoming more capable. It's about becoming the kind of person others genuinely want to see succeed. And that leads us to one of the most powerful principles in this entire journey. A principle so simple that many people dismiss it until they see how profoundly it changes every relationship they build. Before you ask the world for anything, learn how to give it something first. At first, this idea sounds almost unrealistic, maybe even naive. You've probably heard it before. Give more than you take, help people, be generous, nice advice. But in a world driven by competition, deadlines, and ambition, it can feel disconnected from reality. Because reality seems to reward people who negotiate harder, promote themselves louder, and always look out for their own interests. So when someone says give first, a reasonable question immediately follows. Why? Why would anyone willingly invest time, energy, knowledge, or opportunities into other people without knowing if anything will ever come back? It's a fair question, and it's exactly where most people stop thinking. They assume generosity is a personality trait, something reserved for unusually kind people. But what if generosity isn't just kindness? What if it's one of the smartest long-term strategies a human being can adopt? To understand why, we have to look beyond business. Imagine two neighbors. The first only knocks on your door when something is broken. They need a ladder, a favor, a ride, a recommendation. Every conversation begins with a request. The second neighbor is different. They wave when they see you. They remember your children's names. They bring your package inside when you're away. They ask how your week is going. Months pass before they ever ask for anything. Now imagine both neighbors need help on the same day. Who do you respond to first? The answer has almost nothing to do with obligation. It has everything to do with trust. Human beings naturally remember people who make life easier, not because we keep score, because our brains quietly associate those people with reliability and goodwill. Trust isn't built during the moment of need. It's built long before the need ever appears. That's why the biggest misunderstanding about generosity is believing it's a transaction. It isn't. A transaction asks, what do I get in return? Generosity asks, how can I leave this person better than I found them? Those two questions create completely different lives. The first produces short-term exchanges. The second builds long-term relationships. And long-term relationships create opportunities that no transaction ever could. Think back to someone who genuinely changed your life. Maybe they answered a question when they didn't have to. Maybe they introduced you to someone important. Maybe they believed in you before anyone else did. Now ask yourself something interesting. Did they help because they calculated the return on investment? Or did they help because that's simply who they were? The people who have the greatest impact on our lives often don't act generously as a strategy. Generosity has become part of their identity. And that's an important distinction. When generosity is a tactic, people eventually notice. The compliment feels rehearsed. The favor comes with invisible strings attached. The conversation quietly becomes a negotiation. People are remarkably good at sensing hidden agendas. Not because they're suspicious, because authenticity has a different emotional weight. You can feel the difference between someone listening to understand and someone listening for their turn to speak. You can feel the difference between someone introducing you to another person because it genuinely helps, and someone doing it only to earn a future favor. Trust grows in those tiny moments, sometimes without either person realizing it. Keith Ferrazzi noticed this pattern everywhere he looked. The people surrounded by extraordinary opportunities weren't constantly asking, who can help me? More often, they were asking, who can I help today? That shift may seem subtle. It isn't. It changes every interaction. Imagine walking into a room full of strangers. One person enters thinking, I hope someone here can advance my career. Another enters thinking, I wonder if I can make someone else's day easier. They'll ask different questions, listen differently, remember different details, leave different impressions. And over time, they'll build completely different reputations. One becomes known as someone who takes. The other becomes known as someone who gives. Reputations spread quietly, not through advertisements, through conversations. One recommendation, then another. One grateful person tells two more. Years later, people you've never met already have an opinion about you, not because of your resume, because of your reputation. That's why generosity compounds. It doesn't always return from the same person you helped. Sometimes it comes from someone you've never met. One introduction creates another. One thoughtful conversation inspires another. One unexpected act of kindness becomes a story another person tells years later. The path is rarely direct, but that's exactly what makes it powerful. Many of life's greatest opportunities don't travel in straight lines. They move through people. This doesn't mean saying yes to everything. Healthy generosity still requires boundaries. Helping everyone at the expense of your own well-being eventually leads to exhaustion, not contribution. The goal isn't to become endlessly available. The goal is to become intentionally valuable. Sometimes that's sharing an idea. Sometimes it's making an introduction. Sometimes it's simply remembering to ask, how did that interview go, when everyone else has already forgotten? Small actions, quiet moments, invisible investments. Individually, they don't seem life-changing. Collectively, they reshape how the world experiences you. And perhaps that's the biggest surprise of all. The world doesn't reward givers because generosity is magically repaid. The world rewards givers because generous people build trust. Trust creates relationships. Relationships create opportunities. And opportunities often arrive wearing the face of another human being. But if giving is so powerful, why do so many people still struggle to build meaningful relationships? Because we've misunderstood the very word we've been using all along. We've been told to network. Yet that single word may be the reason so many people get relationships completely wrong. Sometimes, one word is enough to make people reject an idea before they ever understand it. For many people, that word is networking. The moment they hear it, a picture appears in their mind. A crowded conference room, forced smiles, business cards exchanged in seconds. Conversations that begin with enthusiasm and end with someone asking for a favor. It feels artificial, calculated, transactional, almost exhausting. And perhaps that's why so many thoughtful people avoid it completely. They don't dislike people. They dislike pretending. They don't want every conversation to feel like a hidden negotiation. They don't want friendships to become business strategies. So they distance themselves from the entire idea. Without realizing it, they're rejecting something much more important than networking. They're rejecting intentional human connection. Keith Ferrazzi came to believe the problem wasn't relationships. The problem was the language surrounding them. Because the word networking quietly teaches the wrong lesson. It suggests that people are resources, contacts, assets, stepping stones. It encourages a question that sounds harmless, but changes everything. What can this person do for me? Once that question enters the conversation, something subtle happens. Curiosity disappears. Listening becomes performance. Kindness becomes strategy. People stop feeling like people and begin feeling like opportunities. The irony is that human beings notice this far more quickly than we imagine. We've all experienced it. Someone asks how we're doing, but they're already scanning the room for someone more important. Someone compliments our work, only to immediately ask for something. Someone reaches out after years of silence, and within minutes, we understand why. Nothing dishonest was said, yet somehow, the conversation leaves us feeling smaller. Because genuine connection was never the goal. Now compare that with another experience. Imagine meeting someone who asks thoughtful questions and actually waits for the answer. Someone who introduces you to another person without expecting recognition. Someone who remembers a conversation you had months ago and follows up simply because they cared enough to remember. After that conversation, you don't remember every word they said. You remember how you felt, respected, seen, valued. That's not networking, that's humanity. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding in modern professional life is believing relationships begin when two people exchange information. Real relationships begin when two people exchange trust. Information can be collected in seconds. Trust cannot. Trust is built one promise at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of consistency at a time. It's slow, sometimes frustratingly slow. But that's precisely why it's valuable. Anything that can be created instantly can usually disappear just as quickly. Trust doesn't. Imagine two bridges. One is assembled overnight. The other is built carefully over months, every beam tested, every foundation reinforced. When the storm arrives, which bridge would you choose? Relationships are no different. The strongest ones aren't created during moments of need. They're built quietly, long before the storm ever appears. That's why some people seem to have extraordinary luck. When challenges come, they already have bridges. Others begin building only after the river is in front of them. By then, it's often too late. This changes how we think about almost every interaction. The coffee you almost canceled, the message you almost ignored, the introduction you almost didn't make. Those moments rarely feel significant. Yet years later, they may become the very moments your future quietly depends upon. Not because you planned it, because relationships have a way of connecting events that seem completely unrelated at the time. One conversation leads to another. One introduction creates another. One act of kindness inspires another. Like ripples spreading across a lake, the original action disappears from view. The impact continues. That's why the strongest relationship builders rarely ask, "How many people do I know?" They ask something far more meaningful. How many people genuinely trust me? Those are very different scorecards. One measures quantity, the other measures depth. And depth has a remarkable way of outlasting quantity. Think about the people you trust most. Is it because they impressed you once or because they consistently showed up over time? Trust doesn't grow from extraordinary moments alone. It grows from ordinary moments repeated with extraordinary consistency. A returned phone call, a thoughtful introduction, keeping a promise, remembering a birthday, celebrating someone else's success without making it about yourself. None of those actions look dramatic, yet together, they shape a reputation that quietly travels ahead of you. Eventually, people begin recommending you before you've introduced yourself. They mention your name in conversations you'll never hear, not because you mastered networking, because you became someone others genuinely enjoy helping. That's an entirely different way of living. And perhaps, an entirely different definition of success. But there's another layer to this philosophy that makes it even more powerful. If relationships aren't random, and trust isn't accidental, then maybe the people who seem well-connected aren't simply more social. Maybe they've built an invisible system that quietly strengthens every relationship over time. A system so ordinary that most people overlook it completely. And once you see that system, you'll never think about opportunity the same way again. Most people believe they understand how the world works. You study hard, you work hard, you get paid, you save, you invest, you build wealth. It's a simple equation. Time becomes money. Money becomes security. Security becomes success. That's the economy we're taught to see. The visible economy. It's measured in salaries, job titles, profits, market value, promotions, awards, followers, numbers. Everything has a price. Everything can be counted. But beneath that visible economy, another one has been operating your entire life. Quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. It has no stock exchange, no currency, no quarterly reports, yet it influences almost every important opportunity you'll ever receive. Call it the invisible economy. Its currency isn't money. Its currency is trust. Its wealth isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by what other people believe about you when you're not in the room. Its investments aren't made with dollars. They're made with consistency, generosity, reliability, integrity. Most people spend their entire lives trying to become richer in the visible economy, while unknowingly remaining bankrupt in the invisible one. Imagine two professionals. Both are equally talented. Both work just as hard. Both have similar experience. On paper, they're almost identical. Then an opportunity appears. A leadership position, a major client, an invitation to join an exciting new company. Neither person applies. Someone else makes the decision. One name comes up almost immediately. She'd be perfect. Another voice agrees. I've worked with her. A third person smiles. You can trust her. Within minutes, the decision is almost made. No interview, no competition, no dramatic presentation. From the outside, it looks like luck. Inside the invisible economy, it looks like accumulated trust. That's what most people never see. Opportunities rarely begin with applications. They begin with conversations. Conversations you may never hear every day. Your name is either moving through those conversations or it isn't. Not because of marketing, because of memory. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere today, someone is recommending another person. Somewhere, someone is warning another person. Somewhere, someone is remembering an act of kindness from 5 years ago. Somewhere, someone is deciding who deserves an opportunity. Every one of those moments belongs to an economy few people consciously invest in. Keith Ferrazzi noticed something fascinating. The most connected people weren't obsessed with collecting contacts. They were quietly accumulating something far more valuable. Goodwill, not the kind written on a balance sheet, the kind stored inside human memory. Goodwill grows differently than money. Money decreases when you spend it. Goodwill often grows when you share it. Introduce two people who later build something meaningful together, and neither of them forgets who made the introduction. Help someone solve a difficult problem, and long after the problem disappears, the memory remains. Celebrate another person's success without asking for attention, and you've deposited something into an account you may never even realize exists. The remarkable thing about this invisible economy is that it compounds, not linearly, exponentially. One person trusts you, then introduces you to another. That person introduces you to someone else. One thoughtful act becomes 10 conversations. 10 conversations become one opportunity. That opportunity creates another relationship. Years later, it's almost impossible to trace where it all began. Compounding always looks, until suddenly it looks inevitable. Financial investors understand this instinctively. No one expects one day of investing to create wealth. The power comes from consistency over decades. Relationships work exactly the same way. One sincere conversation rarely changes your life. Neither does one thoughtful follow-up or one introduction, but thousands of small moments, spread across years, begin creating a reputation that almost seems to have a life of its own. That's why some people appear to be everywhere. Every conference, every opportunity, every exciting project. People often assume they're simply more outgoing. Sometimes they are, but more often, they've spent years making deposits into the invisible economy, while everyone else was watching only the visible one. And here's where the misunderstanding becomes dangerous. Many people hear this and immediately think, so relationships are just another investment strategy. No, that's not what this means. The invisible economy doesn't reward manipulation. It punishes it. People eventually recognize when generosity is only a disguise for self-interest. Trust built on calculation is fragile. Trust built on genuine care is remarkably resilient. That's why the invisible economy follows different rules. You cannot force trust. You cannot demand loyalty. You cannot purchase genuine respect. Those things must be earned, slowly, repeatedly, patiently. The irony is almost poetic. The harder you chase relationships for personal gain, the more they slip away. The more genuinely you invest in other people, the more opportunities quietly begin finding you. Not because the universe keeps score, because people do, not consciously, emotionally. Human beings remember how you made them feel. Whether you celebrated them, whether you listened, whether you showed up when there was nothing to gain. Those memories become invisible recommendations. And invisible recommendations quietly shape visible outcomes. Perhaps that's why some of the wealthiest people in the world speak less about networking and more about reputation. Less about influence and more about trust, because eventually they realize something extraordinary. Money can buy access. It cannot buy advocacy. It can purchase attention. It cannot purchase genuine belief. Only trust creates that. And once someone truly believes in you, they begin opening doors you didn't even know existed. Which leads to one final realization. If trust is the real currency, then every ordinary day becomes an investment decision. Every conversation, every promise, every introduction, every act of generosity. Every moment you choose to help when no reward is guaranteed, you're either making a deposit or missing an opportunity to make one. The invisible economy is always operating. The only question is, have you been investing in it? Because once you understand that, one final mystery finally begins to make sense. Why do some opportunities seem to arrive at exactly the right moment when, in reality, they began growing years before anyone noticed them? Most people remember the day an opportunity arrives. The email, the phone call, the handshake, the interview, the introduction, the promotion, the investment, the contract. That becomes the story they tell. I got the opportunity on that day, but that's only the second chapter. The real story started much earlier. Imagine a tree standing in the middle of a field. People admire its height, its branches, its shade, its strength. What they don't see is the seed that disappeared beneath the ground years before. The tree has two birthdays, the day everyone notices it and the day it quietly began. Opportunities are much the same. The visible birthday is exciting. It's easy to celebrate. The invisible birthday is almost always forgotten because it happened long before anyone knew it mattered. Think back to a meaningful opportunity in your own life. Maybe your first job, a promotion, a client who changed your business, a mentor who transformed your thinking, a friend who introduced you to someone important. Now ask yourself one question. When did that opportunity actually begin? Was it the day you received the offer? Or was it months earlier, when you stayed after a meeting to genuinely thank someone for their guidance? Was it years earlier, when you chose to help someone without expecting anything in return? Was it the afternoon you remembered a conversation everyone else had forgotten? Or the evening you made one introduction between two people who are still grateful today? We love dramatic turning points. Life usually prefers quiet beginnings. That's why opportunities often feel mysterious. We only see the harvest. We almost never see the seasons that produced it. Keith Ferrazzi realized something remarkable. The people who seemed unusually fortunate weren't constantly chasing the next opportunity. They were quietly planting future opportunities through present relationships, without knowing exactly where those relationships might lead. That requires a different kind of patience. Modern life trains us to expect immediate feedback. Send a message, receive a reply, place an order, receive a package, post an idea, watch the numbers. Relationships don't follow that timeline. Sometimes you help someone today, and nothing appears to happen. Weeks pass, months pass, years pass. Then one morning, your phone rings, an unexpected recommendation, a new partnership, an invitation you never anticipated. From the outside, it looks like fortune finally smiled. But fortune didn't suddenly appear. It matured, like a seed becoming a tree. Like trust becoming advocacy, like a single conversation becoming a lifelong friendship. There's another reason this idea matters. It changes how we think about today's decisions. When you believe opportunities begin only when they're visible, you prepare only after they're announced. You update your resume when the job appears. You reconnect with people when you need advice. You attend events because you're looking for something. Everything becomes reactive. But when you understand that every opportunity has an invisible beginning, your behavior changes. You invest before there's a reward. You nurture relationships before there's a reason. You become curious before you become needy. You give before you ask. Not because you're manipulating the future, because you've finally accepted that meaningful things take time to grow. A farmer doesn't accuse the soil of failing after one afternoon. A musician doesn't expect mastery after one lesson. A family isn't built through one conversation. Some of the most valuable things in life refuse to be rushed. Relationships belong on that list. And perhaps that's why they create such extraordinary returns. Very few people are willing to invest consistently in something that doesn't produce immediate results. Those who do often appear lucky years later. But what we call luck is frequently the visible expression of invisible consistency. This realization changes the meaning of ambition itself. Ambition is no longer only about reaching higher, it's about reaching outward. Not only asking, what future am I trying to build, but also, who am I becoming while I build it? Because eventually, people stop remembering every achievement. They remember your reputation. They remember whether you kept your word, whether you celebrated their victories, whether you showed up when there was nothing to gain, whether you made them feel seen. Those memories become something extraordinary, not simply gratitude, trust, And trust has a remarkable habit of traveling farther than we ever do. It crosses companies, industries, cities, generations, long after individual conversations have been forgotten. Perhaps that's why some names continue opening doors long after the original introduction. Not because those people mastered a networking technique, because over years, sometimes decades, they became known for something much rarer, being someone others could believe in. And maybe that's the deepest lesson hidden beneath everything we've explored so far. The future you're hoping for isn't created only by the work you finish tomorrow. It's also being quietly shaped by the conversations you choose to have today, by the promises you keep, by the people you encourage, by the trust you earn when nobody is watching. Every opportunity has two birthdays, the day the world finally notices it, and the day you unknowingly began creating it. The first birthday feels like success. The second is where success is actually born. And if that's true, then the question is no longer whether relationships matter. The question becomes something much more practical. If trust is built one small moment at a time, how do you intentionally design a life that keeps those moments alive? That is where Keith Ferrazzi's philosophy moves from an inspiring idea to a daily practice. And that's where our journey goes next. If every opportunity has two birthdays, then perhaps every relationship has two endings. The first ending is obvious. An argument, a betrayal, a painful goodbye. Most of us recognize those moments immediately. But there's another ending, far quieter, far more common, and far more dangerous. It's the ending that arrives without anyone noticing. No one gets angry. Nobody walks away. Nothing dramatic happens. Life simply becomes busy. A message waits until tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. Then one day, you realize you've been meaning to call someone for almost 2 years. The relationship didn't explode. It evaporated. That's the strange thing about human connection. It rarely breaks all at once. It slowly dries out. Imagine walking through a beautiful garden. Every flower is alive. Every tree is healthy. Everything feels effortless. But now imagine no one returns. Not for a week, not for a month, not for a year. The garden doesn't disappear overnight. It changes so gradually that you almost don't notice. The flowers bloom a little less. The soil becomes a little drier. The weeds grow a little taller. One season passes, then another. Eventually, people stop calling it a garden. Now it's just abandoned land. Relationships follow the same law. They don't survive because they once mattered. They survive because someone continues caring for them. That's a truth modern life quietly encourages us to forget. We're taught to maintain our careers, our health, our finances. We service our cars, update our software, charge our phones every night. Yet somehow, we assume the people we love, the mentors who guided us, the friends who stood beside us, will simply remain exactly as they are, without any attention at all. It's a beautiful assumption. It's also an impossible one. Everything alive needs care. Trees, muscles, communities, trust, even confidence. Why would relationships be the only living thing that grows stronger through neglect? They aren't. They never have been. Think about someone you've known for years. Someone who once knew your dreams before anyone else. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to stop caring about them. You simply stopped participating in the relationship. Tiny absences accumulated. One missed conversation, one forgotten celebration, one unanswered message. Individually, none of them seemed important. Together, they quietly rewrote the relationship. We often believe memories preserve connection. They don't. Memories preserve history. Only participation preserves relationships. That's an important difference. A photograph can remind you of a friendship. It cannot continue it. Many people spend years feeling grateful for those who changed their lives. Very few transform that gratitude into action. And gratitude that is never expressed slowly becomes invisible. Here's another uncomfortable truth. Relationships don't fade because people stop caring. They fade because caring remains trapped inside good intentions. I should check on them. I should say thank you. I should invite them. Those words sound harmless, but there's a silent danger hiding inside the word should. It creates the comforting illusion that intention and action are somehow the same thing. They aren't. Relationships experience actions, not intentions. Imagine a bridge connecting two mountains. Every day people cross it. They talk. They help one another carry heavy loads. Then slowly, people stop crossing. Not because the bridge collapsed, because everyone assumed someone else would keep using it. Years later, the bridge is still standing, but it's covered in dust, not broken, unused. Many relationships look exactly like that. Still standing, waiting, wondering if someone will cross first. Here's what makes this hopeful rather than tragic. Neglect is gradual, which means renewal can be gradual too. You don't rebuild trust through one extraordinary conversation. You rebuild it the same way it was created. One small moment at a time, one sincere question. One unexpected message, one shared meal, one promise kept. The strongest relationships aren't built by dramatic gestures. They're built by ordinary moments repeated with uncommon consistency. Perhaps that's why the people who seem deeply connected don't necessarily have more free time than everyone else. They simply understand something different. They don't see relationships as interruptions to their schedule. They see relationships as the reason the schedule matters. That shift changes everything. A phone call stops being another task. It becomes an investment. A conversation stops being small talk. It becomes another brick in a bridge that may carry both people years into the future. This isn't about becoming busier. It's about becoming more intentional. Because attention is one of the rarest gifts modern life allows us to give. And people remember those who gave it freely. Maybe that's the real lesson hidden beneath every lasting relationship. Love isn't maintained by intensity. Friendship isn't maintained by history. Trust isn't maintained by memory. They're maintained by presence. By choosing again and again to show another person, you still matter to me. And once you begin seeing relationships as living things, another realization becomes impossible to ignore. If every relationship requires care, then where you place your time may reveal something far more honest than anything you ever say. Not your intentions, not your ambitions, your values. Because every calendar tells a story. The question is, does yours tell the story of the life you're actually trying to build? There's an old saying, if you want to know what someone values, don't listen to what they say, watch what they make time for. At first, that sounds almost unfair. Life is busy. Work demands attention, children need us, bills must be paid, deadlines don't wait. Of course, relationships sometimes have to take a back seat, and for a while, they often do. But something subtle begins to happen. The things we postpone once become the things we postpone forever. A phone call becomes next weekend, coffee becomes when things slow down, dinner becomes sometime next month, then months quietly become years. One day, we look around and wonder where everyone went. The truth is, they didn't disappear overnight. Our attention simply drifted somewhere else. Attention is one of the strangest currencies in the modern world. Unlike money, everyone receives the same amount each day, 24 hours. No one gets more, no one gets less. The only difference is where those hours are invested. Imagine someone gave you a bank statement instead of your calendar. It showed exactly where every hour of your life had gone during the past 12 months. How much time was invested in work, entertainment, learning, family, friends, quiet reflection, helping other people. Without reading a single word about your goals, someone could probably tell you what mattered most. Not because of what you believed, because of what you repeatedly chose. That's the uncomfortable truth. Our calendars tell the truth, even when our intentions don't. We often say, my family comes first, my friends mean everything to me, I'll always make time for the people I care about. Most of us genuinely believe those words. But life has an interesting way of testing beliefs. Not through dramatic choices, through ordinary Tuesdays, through unexpected meetings, through another email arriving just before dinner, through another project that quietly steals another evening. Character isn't revealed by extraordinary moments. It's revealed by repeated decisions, 1 hour, one conversation, one choice at a time. Imagine two people at the end of a long workday. Both are exhausted. Both have another dozen things they could do. The first thinks, I'll call my friend next week. The second thinks, I only have 10 minutes. But 10 minutes is enough to let someone know they still matter. Neither decision feels life-changing, yet multiply those decisions across 10 years. One life slowly fills with neglected connections. The other becomes surrounded by people who never doubted they were remembered. That's how extraordinary lives are often built. Not through extraordinary moments. Through ordinary moments treated as extraordinary. Keith Ferrazzi observed something that many successful people eventually discover for themselves. Relationships rarely collapse because of one mistake. They slowly weaken from a lack of consistent attention. Attention is love made visible. Attention is respect made visible. Attention is friendship made visible. You don't always have to solve someone's problem. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give another person is your undivided presence. Think about the last conversation that made you feel truly important. Chances are, it wasn't because the other person had brilliant advice. It was because they listened, really listened. They weren't checking their phone. They weren't waiting for their turn to speak. For those few minutes, you felt like the most important person in their world. People remember that. Long after they've forgotten the details of the conversation, modern life constantly competes for our attention. Notifications, messages, meetings, algorithms designed to keep us scrolling. The battle isn't simply about productivity anymore, it's about presence. Every notification asks the same silent question. What deserves your attention right now? Most of us answer without thinking. That's why attention has become so valuable. It's becoming increasingly rare. When you give someone your full attention today, you're giving them something that can't be manufactured, something that can't be downloaded, something that can't be replaced, your presence. Perhaps that's why the strongest relationships don't always belong to people with the most free time. They belong to people who protect moments that everyone else allows to disappear. A birthday remembered, a conversation continued, a message sent after hearing difficult news, a congratulations offered without being reminded. These moments look small, but they carry an extraordinary message. I remembered you, even when I didn't need anything. That sentence may never be spoken aloud, yet people feel it. Over time, those moments become trust, then loyalty, then friendship. Eventually, they become part of your reputation, not because you were always available, because when you were present, you were fully present. There's another reason this matters. Every yes is quietly creating a no. When we say yes to another unnecessary meeting, we may be saying no to a meaningful conversation. When we say yes to endless distraction, we may be saying no to someone waiting for encouragement. Life isn't only measured by what we accomplish. It's also measured by what our attention quietly builds, because attention grows whatever it touches. Give constant attention to fear, and fear grows. Give constant attention to resentment, and resentment grows. Give consistent attention to people, and relationships grow. It's one of life's simplest laws. Whatever receives your attention eventually shapes your future. Maybe that's why truly connected people don't see relationships as items on a checklist. They see them as living investments deserving of regular care, not because someone demanded it, because that's the kind of person they've chosen to become. And here's something beautiful. Maintaining meaningful relationships doesn't require grand gestures. It rarely asks for hours. More often, it asks for moments, small moments, almost invisible moments, the kind most people overlook because they seem too insignificant to matter. But perhaps, those tiny moments are where the greatest transformations quietly begin. Because trust is almost never built through one unforgettable act. It's built through hundreds of moments so small that nobody notices them while they're happening. Until one day, everyone notices the relationship they created. Human beings have an unusual relationship with progress. We notice dramatic change. We celebrate dramatic change. We remember dramatic change. A company doubles in size. Someone loses 50 pounds. An athlete wins a championship. A business becomes worth millions. Those moments become headlines. But almost nothing extraordinary begins as something extraordinary. Forests begin as seeds. Masterpieces begin as rough sketches. Trust begins as moments so small, most people never notice them. Perhaps that's why relationships confuse us. We're waiting for one unforgettable conversation, when life is quietly transformed by hundreds of forgettable ones. Imagine placing one drop of water into an empty glass. Nothing seems different. Add another. Still almost nothing. A third, a fourth, a tenth, a hundredth. Each individual drop appears insignificant. Yet eventually, the glass becomes full. No single drop deserves the credit. The transformation belonged to all of them together. Trust works exactly the same way. That's why I'd like you to imagine something we'll call * the rule of tiny deposits. Every interaction with another human being becomes one of two things: a small deposit or a small withdrawal. Not emotionally, not financially, relationally. Remembering someone's birthday is a deposit. Keeping a promise is a deposit. Listening without interrupting is a deposit. Checking in after difficult news is a deposit. Making someone feel understood is a deposit. None of these moments seem powerful on their own. That's exactly why they're powerful. Because almost everyone underestimates them. Think about the people you trust most. Was it one spectacular act that created your trust? Probably not. It was consistency. You learned they kept their word. You learned they remembered what mattered to you. You learned they appeared when they said they would. Your confidence wasn't built in one afternoon. It accumulated. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. Now imagine the opposite. Someone frequently cancels plans, forgets commitments, only calls when they need something, promises to follow up and never does. Again, none of those moments seem catastrophic. But trust doesn't disappear because of one major failure. It slowly leaks away through tiny withdrawals. The remarkable thing about relationships is that they rarely collapse under the weight of one enormous mistake. More often, they slowly weaken beneath thousands of unnoticed ones. Perhaps that's why people are often surprised when a friendship fades, or a partnership ends, or a mentor becomes distant. They remember there was never a dramatic conflict. That's true. There didn't need to be. Neglect compounds just as consistently as care does. Here's something fascinating. When psychologists study long-term relationships, they repeatedly find that stability is rarely created by grand romantic gestures or extraordinary events. It's built through consistent patterns of responsiveness, reliability, and everyday care. Life-changing relationships are usually constructed out of ordinary days. Keith Ferrazzi observed this same pattern in professional life. The people who built extraordinary communities weren't constantly trying to impress everyone. They simply became remarkably reliable. They remembered, they followed through, they stayed curious. They celebrated other people's victories, again and again and again. Eventually, people stopped remembering individual actions. They remembered the person. That's the hidden power of tiny deposits. They eventually disappear, not because they don't matter, Because they've become part of someone's identity. Imagine meeting two different people. One leaves every conversation trying to appear impressive. The other leaves every conversation making the other person feel important. 5 years later, which person do you think people are still talking about? Not because they were louder, because they were remembered. Memory itself follows an interesting rule. People rarely remember every sentence you spoke. They remember the emotional pattern you consistently created. Did conversations leave them encouraged, heard, inspired, calmer, more confident? Those emotional fingerprints become your reputation. And reputations are simply tiny deposits, remembered collectively. Perhaps that's why the strongest relationships rarely feel dramatic from the inside. To outsiders, they appear effortless. But hidden beneath that effortlessness are hundreds of invisible choices. One message, one introduction, one promise, one celebration, one thoughtful question, one more tiny deposit. Modern culture has trained us to chase breakthroughs. The people who build extraordinary lives often chase something else. Consistency. Because consistency eventually creates breakthroughs. Imagine standing beneath a canyon carved by a river. No single drop of water created that landscape. Time did. Persistence did. Tiny moments repeated over and over again did. Relationships obey the same law. No single conversation changes your life. But thousands of conversations, guided by generosity, integrity, and genuine curiosity, can reshape an entire future. Perhaps that's why some people seem impossible to forget. Not because they accomplished one extraordinary thing, because they practiced ordinary kindness so consistently that everyone around them quietly began trusting them. And here's the beautiful part. Tiny deposits don't only strengthen existing relationships. Sometimes they create entirely new ones. One thoughtful introduction, one unexpected act of generosity, one simple decision to connect two people who could help each other. That single moment may take only a few minutes. Its impact may last for decades. Because there is one role even more powerful than being well connected. Becoming the person who creates connections. Not the traveler crossing the bridge, but the one who quietly builds it. And once you become the bridge, you stop collecting relationships. You begin creating communities. There's an interesting question most of us never ask. When you leave a room, what remains after you're gone? Do people remember your resume, your job title, your achievements? Sometimes, but more often, they remember something much simpler, how they felt in your presence. Whether you listened, whether you encouraged, whether you made someone else's path a little easier. For years, many ambitious people believe success is about building a bigger network. Meeting more people, collecting more contacts, expanding the circle. It sounds logical, until you notice something remarkable. The people who leave the deepest impact rarely spend their lives asking, who should I meet next? They ask a completely different question. Who should meet each other? That single shift changes everything. Imagine walking into a village divided by a wide river. On one side, there are talented artists searching for opportunities. On the other, there are entrepreneurs searching for creativity. Both groups need each other. Neither group knows the other exists. Now imagine someone quietly builds a bridge. They don't become the artist. They don't become the entrepreneur. Yet without them, the collaboration never happens. Years later, companies are created. Friendships begin. Families form. Ideas spread across the world. The bridge receives no headlines. Yet none of it exists without the bridge. Human relationships work in exactly the same way. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can offer another person isn't your advice. It's your introduction. Not because you control opportunities, because you recognize possibilities that others cannot yet see. Think back over your own life. Was there ever someone who introduced you to a future friend, a mentor, a colleague, a business partner? Maybe it seemed like an ordinary conversation at the time. Just two names mentioned over coffee. But years later, that moment became one of the invisible turning points in your story. Not because someone gave you success, because someone connected two paths that were meant to cross. We often underestimate introductions because they happen so quickly. A conversation lasting 30 seconds can reshape 30 years. Imagine a teacher introducing two curious students after class because they shared the same passion. One day they build a company, or discover a breakthrough, or write a book together. Nobody remembers the introduction. Everyone remembers the achievement. But the achievement had an invisible beginning. The bridge came first. Perhaps that's why generosity becomes so powerful. True generosity isn't only giving what you have. Sometimes it's connecting people, connecting ideas, connecting opportunities. You become a quiet architect of possibility. Notice what happens when someone becomes known for doing that. People stop thinking they're well connected. Instead, they begin saying they always bring out the best in people. That's a completely different reputation. One is based on access. The other is based on contribution. Access impresses people for a moment. Contribution stays with them for a lifetime. There's another reason becoming the bridge matters. It changes your focus. When life becomes competitive, our attention naturally narrows. We compare, we protect, we worry there's not enough opportunity for everyone. But bridges are built from a completely different belief. The belief that helping one person doesn't reduce your future, it expands it. Imagine lighting one candle from another. The first candle loses nothing, yet the room becomes brighter. Relationships often follow the same principle. Helping two people find each other doesn't divide opportunity, it multiplies it. That's why communities become stronger than individuals. One person's strength fills another person's weakness. One person's experience shortens another person's struggle. One person's encouragement restores another person's confidence. No single individual possesses everything. Communities do. The remarkable people history remembers were often builders of communities. Some gathered thinkers around a common purpose. Some introduced people who never would have met on their own. Some created spaces where strangers became collaborators. They understood something simple. Human potential grows faster together than apart. And perhaps, that's one of the greatest misunderstandings about influence. Influence isn't measured by how many people follow you. It's measured by how many people flourish because they knew you. Read that again in your mind. Not how many people admire you. How many people became stronger because your life intersected with theirs. That is influence, not attention, transformation. Imagine if every morning you began with one question. Not what can I accomplish today, but who could benefit from knowing each other. That single question quietly changes the architecture of your life. You stop entering rooms looking for opportunity. You begin entering rooms looking for possibility. Possibility for someone else. Ironically, that's often when possibility begins finding you. Not because people owe you anything, because trust has become your reputation, contribution has become your identity, and identities are remembered far longer than accomplishments. The beautiful thing about bridges is that they don't choose who crosses them. They simply remain available, steady, reliable, strong enough to carry others. Perhaps becoming that kind of person is one of the highest forms of success. Not because everyone knows your name, but because lives quietly become better after crossing paths with yours. And once you begin living this way, another surprising truth emerges. People don't trust perfection, they trust humanity. Not the person who appears to have every answer, but the one who has the courage to be real. Because every strong bridge is built on one foundation stronger than competence alone: authenticity. For most of our lives, we're taught to hide our imperfections. Don't let them see you're nervous. Don't admit you don't know. Don't show weakness. Always appear confident. Always appear capable. Always appear in control. At first, that sounds like good advice. After all, confidence attracts opportunity. Competence earns respect. Preparation matters. All of that is true. But somewhere along the way, many of us confuse confidence with perfection. And perfection creates an unexpected problem. It leaves no room for another human being. Think about the people you trust most. Are they flawless? Probably not. In fact, the people who often leave the deepest impression are those who are willing to say, "I made a mistake. I don't know. I could use your advice." Those words don't make them smaller. They make them real. Human beings have an unusual ability. We instinctively recognize authenticity, not because we analyze it, because we feel it. We've all experienced both conversations. One feels rehearsed, every answer polished, every story perfectly edited, nothing vulnerable, nothing uncertain, nothing human. The other conversation feels different. Someone laughs at their own mistake, admits they struggled, shares a lesson they learned the hard way. Suddenly, the conversation changes. Not because they became more impressive, because they became more relatable. Perhaps trust has never been built on perfection. Perhaps trust has always been built on honesty. Imagine walking across a frozen lake. The surface looks smooth, perfect, but beneath your feet, you don't know how strong the ice really is. Now imagine crossing an old wooden bridge. It has scratches, weathered boards, years of visible wear. It doesn't pretend to be untouched, yet you trust it. Not because it appears perfect, because it has proven it can carry weight. People are remarkably similar. We don't trust people because they appear untouched by life. We trust people who have carried life's weight and remained kind anyway. There's an interesting pattern you begin noticing once you pay attention. The strongest leaders rarely pretend to know everything. The best teachers continue asking questions. The wisest mentors still admit they're learning, not because they lack confidence. Because confidence no longer requires pretending. Real confidence says, "I don't have every answer, but I'm willing to discover them." That creates safety, and safety changes relationships. When people feel safe, they stop performing. Ideas become more honest, questions become more thoughtful, mistakes become opportunities to learn instead of reasons to hide. Communities become stronger because no one has to protect an impossible image. Perhaps that's why genuine connection is so rare. Many conversations become performances. People compete over achievements, titles, success, who appears busiest, who appears most important. Yet underneath those performances, almost everyone is carrying the same quiet hope. I hope someone sees the real me and stays. That's one of the deepest human needs. Not admiration, acceptance. Imagine meeting someone who never tries to prove they're extraordinary. Instead, they become deeply curious about your story. They ask thoughtful questions, listen carefully, share their own experiences honestly, never pretending they've figured life out. When the conversation ends, you don't remember feeling judged. You remember feeling understood. That feeling is unforgettable, not because it flatters the ego, because it reminds us what genuine connection feels like. Here's something worth considering. Perfection creates distance. Authenticity creates closeness. Perfection says, look at how complete I am. Authenticity says, here's what I'm still learning. One invites comparison, the other invites conversation. The remarkable thing is that vulnerability isn't about oversharing. It's not turning every conversation into a confession. It's simply removing the unnecessary armor. It's allowing another human being to meet the person behind the resume, behind the achievements, behind the carefully constructed image, because relationships aren't built between accomplishments. They're built between people. Over time, you begin realizing something beautiful. The strongest relationships aren't formed because two people admire each other. They're formed because two people trust each other enough to be honest. Honesty creates understanding. Understanding creates empathy. Empathy creates loyalty. And loyalty creates relationships capable of surviving difficult seasons. That's the kind of connection opportunity cannot manufacture. It must be earned. One honest conversation at a time. One promise kept. One moment of courage. Not the courage to appear fearless. The courage to be genuine. Perhaps that's why the most memorable people aren't those who seem larger than life. They're the ones who make everyone around them feel more comfortable being themselves. That kind of influence can't be forced. It quietly grows from character. And character has a remarkable way of attracting trust. By now, a different picture of success is beginning to emerge. Not success built on image, not success built on status, but success built on generosity, attention, consistency, connection, and authenticity. The question is no longer, how do I build better relationships? The question has become much deeper. What kind of person am I becoming every time I meet another human being? Because in the end, our relationships don't simply reflect our habits. They reflect our identity. And once your identity begins to change, every conversation changes with it. That's where the final step of this transformation begins. Not with another technique, not with another strategy, but with a simple decision to build a life where relationships are no longer something you manage. They become the way you choose to live. There comes a point when enough ideas gather together that they stop feeling like ideas. They begin feeling like a different way of seeing the world. Perhaps you've noticed that happening. When we first began this journey, relationships looked like something you managed, something you worked on, something that fit somewhere between meetings, deadlines, and responsibilities. Now, they begin to look different. Not another responsibility. The foundation beneath every responsibility. That's a profound shift. Because foundations are rarely noticed, yet everything above them depends on their strength. Imagine trying to build the tallest building in a city. You could spend years perfecting the design, choosing stronger materials, creating beautiful architecture. But if the foundation remains weak, height becomes a liability instead of a strength. Many people spend their lives building taller careers without strengthening the foundation beneath them. From a distance, everything looks successful, then life becomes difficult. A business struggles, a family faces illness, a dream suddenly falls apart. And in those moments, resumes offer very little comfort. Titles don't answer the phone. Awards don't sit beside you in difficult seasons. People do. Perhaps that has always been the hidden lesson. Success isn't only measured by what you build. It's also measured by who remains beside you while you're building it. Modern culture encourages us to ask one question over and over again. What am I becoming? A better leader, a better entrepreneur, a better investor, a better creator, a better professional. Those are worthwhile goals. But perhaps an even deeper question has been quietly waiting underneath them. What kind of person do people become after knowing me? Pause there for a moment, because that question changes everything. Imagine meeting someone after 10 years. Would they say, "You always made me feel heard. You introduced me to someone who changed my life. You remembered me when everyone else forgot. You believed in me before I believed in myself." Those aren't compliments about achievement. They're reflections of character. And character is what quietly outlives accomplishment. Think about the people whose influence has remained with you for years. Perhaps they never became famous. Perhaps they never wrote best-selling books. Perhaps they never stood on great stages. Yet something they gave you still shapes your life today. A conversation, an opportunity, a moment of encouragement. a difficult truth spoken with kindness. Those gifts continue traveling through the world long after the conversation has ended. That's how relationship-centered lives work. They create ripples, not headlines. One encouraging conversation gives someone courage. That person later encourages another. Years pass. Entire families change direction. Businesses are built. Friendships begin. Communities become stronger. The original conversation is forgotten. The impact continues. Most people underestimate this because ripples don't announce themselves. They simply keep moving. Perhaps that's why the most meaningful lives rarely look dramatic while they're being lived. A phone call, a shared meal, a handwritten note, a thoughtful introduction, a promise kept, a quiet act of generosity, ordinary moments, extraordinary consequences. The beautiful thing about this philosophy is that it doesn't ask you to become someone else. It asks you to become more intentional about who you've always hoped to be. The friend who remembers, the colleague who encourages, the neighbor who notices, the mentor who listens, the leader who creates trust before asking for performance. None of these identities require extraordinary talent. They require ordinary choices, made consistently. Over time, those choices begin changing something unexpected. Not only your relationships, because every repeated action quietly shapes identity. Every time you choose curiosity over judgment, you become a more curious person. Every time you choose generosity over self-interest, you become a more generous person. Every time you choose presence over distraction, you become someone whose presence people remember. That's how identity is formed. Not through declarations, through repetition. Eventually, you stop asking, should I reach out? Because caring has become natural. You stop asking, should I introduce these two people? Because creating opportunity has become instinct. You stop asking, should I listen more carefully? Because listening has become part of who you are. This is no longer a strategy, it's a way of living. And perhaps that's the greatest misunderstanding about meaningful relationships. People assume they're built through extraordinary social skills. More often, they're built through extraordinary consistency in ordinary moments. By now, our understanding of success has changed completely. Success is no longer standing at the top of a mountain alone. It's climbing in such a way that others become stronger because they climb beside you. Success is no longer collecting admiration. It's creating trust, no longer accumulating contacts, creating communities. No longer asking, how far can I go? But quietly wondering, how many lives become a little brighter because I walked this path? Maybe that's the kind of success that lasts, because achievements eventually become memories. Possessions eventually change hands. Careers eventually come to an end. But the way another human being remembers your kindness, your integrity, your encouragement, can continue shaping lives long after you've forgotten the moment yourself. And perhaps that's the real invitation hidden beneath everything we've explored. Not to become better at relationships, but to become the kind of person for whom meaningful relationships are simply a natural expression of character. Because when character changes, habits change. When habits change, relationships change. When relationships, entire futures begin changing with them. And once enough years have passed, people may look at your life and call it fortunate. Connected, successful, they'll see the visible results. What they won't see are the thousands of quiet choices that created them. The conversations, the introductions, the promises, the attention, the courage to be authentic, the willingness to give before asking, the decision, made over and over again, to place people at the center of your life. Because that's where every extraordinary opportunity quietly begins. And once you begin living this way, time itself becomes your greatest partner. Every year strengthens trust. Every season deepens relationships. Every small act begins multiplying beyond anything you could have planned. Which brings us to the next chapter of this journey. Not how relationships begin, not how they grow, but how time transforms ordinary acts of generosity into a legacy that continues opening doors long after the moment itself has passed. Because the most powerful force behind every meaningful relationship has never been speed. It's compounding. When this journey began, it seemed like we were talking about relationships, about success, about opportunity, about connection. But perhaps those were never the real subjects. Perhaps this journey has always been about something much deeper. The person you quietly become. Through thousands of ordinary choices, we began inside an invisible prison, a place where success looked like standing alone, where asking for help felt like weakness, where independence became something to admire, even when it slowly became isolation. Then we discovered another truth, that no meaningful life has ever been built by one person alone. Every breakthrough, every turning point, every door that opens, carries the fingerprints of countless human connections. Some remembered, many forgotten. We explored trust, generosity, attention, authenticity, not as techniques, not as strategies, but as reflections of character. Because relationships aren't built by extraordinary moments, they're built by ordinary moments. Treat it as if they matter. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson hidden beneath everything we've explored. The life you're building tomorrow is already being shaped by the person you choose to be today. Not only when the stakes are high, but when nobody is watching, when you decide whether to listen or simply wait for your turn to speak, whether to encourage or remain silent, whether to remember or assume there will always be another chance. Those moments rarely feel important. Yet life has a remarkable way of stitching small moments together until one day they become the story of who we are. Imagine your life years from now. Imagine someone trying to describe you. Not your career, not your income, not your accomplishments. You. What do you hope they say? That you were brilliant, successful, influential? Perhaps. But maybe there's something even more meaningful. Maybe you hope they say, I always felt better after talking with them. They remembered me. They believed in people. They made others feel seen. They quietly made the world around them stronger. Because in the end, that may be one of the most honest definitions of success. Not how many people knew your name, but how many people became a little more hopeful, a little more courageous, or a little more confident, because your path crossed theirs. The remarkable thing is that no one is born knowing how to live that way. It's learned, practiced, refined, conversation by conversation, choice by choice, day by day. Perhaps that's why transformation almost never arrives as one dramatic moment. It arrives quietly. The first time you choose curiosity instead of judgment. The first time you reach out simply to ask how someone is doing. The first time you celebrate another person's success without comparing it to your own. The first time you realize that becoming unforgettable has very little to do with becoming impressive, and almost everything to do with becoming genuine. If this documentary has offered anything, I hope it isn't another productivity system or another definition of success. I hope it has offered a different question. Not, how can I get more from the world, but what kind of presence do I leave behind wherever I go? Because that question has no finish line. It becomes a way of living, a way of leading, a way of loving, a way of being remembered. Long after individual conversations have faded from memory, maybe that's what extraordinary lives really are. Not lives filled with extraordinary moments, but ordinary lives lived with extraordinary intention. So, as you leave this story, don't ask yourself how many new people you should meet. Ask something quieter. Who in your life already deserves a little more of your attention? Who has been waiting for a conversation you've been postponing? Whose burden could become lighter because of one thoughtful message, one shared meal, one sincere thank you, or one simple reminder that they still matter? Because the next chapter of your life may not begin with a promotion, or a breakthrough, or a stroke of luck. It may begin with a conversation, one honest conversation, one act of kindness, one decision to become the kind of person whose presence leaves people stronger than they were before. And if enough of us choose to live that way, success stops being something we chase. It becomes something we quietly create together. Perhaps that's how every meaningful life has always been built. One person, one conversation, one ordinary moment at a time. Thank you for spending these moments with me. Until our next journey, take care of the people who make your life richer. And never underestimate the quiet power of simply showing up for another human being. Because sometimes, the smallest moments become the ones that shape an entire life.